Good evening and welcome to the May 13, 2024 Lower Makefield Planning Commission meeting. All members are present except Tajender Gill is not, and Colin Coyle is appearing remotely. Just want to say welcome to our new solicitor, Maureen Carlton. Welcome back. With us now. First item on our agenda this evening, if I can find the agenda, is approval of the minutes from 4/8/2024. Someone want to make a motion? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any comments or concerns about the minutes?
I'm going to abstain since I wasn't here.
Okay. Call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And the motion passes 3-0-1. Next item on our agenda is the commercial sign ordinance discussion, which Jim Majewski, I believe, is going to lead this evening.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. As you may know, the Board of Supervisors has directed us to start looking into our sign ordinance and updating it for more modern requirements. Some of the areas that we need to discuss are items such as the size, the type of signs, locations, illumination, and how effective is our ordinance in really trying to achieve what our goals are for the comprehensive plan. With that, we've provided you with a sample of our existing ordinance. Someone suggested the Princeton sign ordinance, so we sent along a copy of that. And if you'll bear with me, I'll just have a brief little presentation on this that I'll call up just a couple of key points on. So as we begin our ordinance discussion, I just wanted to briefly touch on variances that we've granted over the years. Over the last 20 years, there have been a number of variances granted, Polo Run Apartments, a couple of churches, business in the historic district, one of the schools, that's the Quarry Hill Road one. There's been a few others for the Matrix Project and Toll Brothers to have signs throughout their project and along the frontage, a few banks, an HOA, one of the sign that was not within the main entrance. It was sort of interior, which doesn't quite fall underneath the guidelines. All of these variances had been granted by the zoning hearing board, some of them with conditions that maybe they thought some minor changes needed to be made to what they were proposing to kind of effectuate what we want to see in the way of signs. And the variances that have been granted over the years entailed several different things. One, an excess number of signs. Sometimes they just, you're allowed so many different types of signs, locations. Occasionally when you get into a bigger site, shopping centers and such, they've requested additional signs to help direct people in and around their complex. The size of signs, there have been a few where our ordinance limited the sign to the extent that they didn't feel it really would allow people to adequately driving by, find the place they were going to and be directed into it. Another one for several properties are corner lots. We're only allowed one freestanding sign, but of course, if you have a corner lot, people are coming from two different directions. So I believe a couple of churches have been granted that relief. The First Baptist Church in Newtown up at Stupeville and Route 532 is one that comes to mind. I think St. John's might be another, and there are several of those. Also, we've had a few variances for signs located in areas that are otherwise not permitted, but they made their case that they thought that they had a hardship and the zoning hearing board agreed. And the other one in our office research zoning district along Township Line Road and Stony Hill Road. Interestingly enough, directly illuminated signs are not permitted. So there were several variances granted to allow for a directly illuminated sign within that zoning district. I think the Makefield Crossing South office complex, the one with the pond in front, they were granted a variance because they made the case that, you know, it's difficult to see some of the stuff at night. It's in a kind of built up area with not a lot of residents around and wouldn't be impacting the community unfairly. In commercial districts, there are certain regulations. Parallel on-premises advertising signs are permitted for individual businesses. We have the sign for the CVS at Prickett Reserve, and for the other places that we've had, you'll see the building-mounted signs. We call them parallel on-premises advertising signs. The CG Orthodontics, which is the building right next to Di Lorenzo's, they were allowed to do that subject to HARB review. And of course, any other sign you've seen on a building was either permitted by right, permitted by a variance, or permitted by, in some cases, court orders and stipulations where there was litigation over the development and signs were part of the resolution of that. Freestanding signs are another method of signage that's popular. And obviously you've seen those in all of the office parks, the little directory signs that have the names of the tenants within the complex. And those are permitted subject to regulations for size and the like. I know in residential areas, the signs are more limited. That typically isn't a problem because we don't have really much in the way of commercial in residential districts. But what we do have are we have institutional uses, schools, religious facilities, and those currently they have to go for a variance every time they want a sign, even though it kind of, well, it probably should be something permitted by right, subject to certain conditions. So with that, also there's signs to identify the use or the occupant within a shopping center. And that's something that we have in our couple of shopping centers. You've seen them. I don't think anyone has any major objection to those. And once again, those are either permitted by right, by variance, or by a court stipulation as a settlement to litigation. And then the last one is off-premises signs advertising a land development or subdivision. You know, you've seen the signs out front for developments, and we have them throughout the township. Those are typically either non-illuminated or indirectly illuminated. They have lights shining on them. They're not the signs that are directly illuminated, which are the ones with the light coming from the inside. Go ahead, John.
I happen to have a problem with it. Curious question. How did the light show?
Shadowbrook. Well,
sorry, hold on. Jim, hold on. Sorry, John wasn't on microphone, so if I could repeat what I think was the question was, how is the light show signage permitted for Shady Brook?
Yeah, yes, that's what he asked.
Okay, thank you.
So that's not really part of our sign ordinance. However, that's something that I'm not really sure how it is permitted. It's been going on for, I don't know, 20 years or more. And that's something that we've been looking at, rewriting that, those standards for the way they run their operation, because many of the things that are done there, it doesn't allow for it in the ordinance. However, it's been in effect for 20 years or more.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I just curious.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I mean, whatever.
What?
We do, there probably ought to be something written in there that says what they do and what we allow.
Are you using your microphone?
Yeah, mine's on.
Okay, couldn't tell.
Yeah, and you know, to Adrian's point, and like the first several, they're advertisements, right? They count as off-premise signs by reading this ordinance. Those, you know, the names of the sponsors as you drive by on the road. So I'm not saying let's kill the light show, but they certainly should be under the impact of this ordinance.
I don't necessarily disagree with you on that, although I don't think they're really necessarily signs. It's sort of a different animal that ultimately we really need to get a grasp on that and make sure we have it right.
Yeah, when you have a 16-foot tall logo of a business, and I read this regulations in front of us, that certainly seems like an off-premise sign promoting a business. So
Yeah, I think we'd probably have to delve into this more. They may be considered temporary signs because many of them are associated with the light show during the holidays, et cetera. And given the fact that they've been up for, I don't know, I'll
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
your 20 years that Jim mentioned. They may be grandfathered in. And then the one for Shady Brook that is on the corner of the bypass, that is not Lower Makefield, is it?
It is Lower
It
Makefield.
is? That piece is? Okay. That is up but non-illuminated most of the year.
Correct, I believe.
I believe so. I mean, our office is right across the street. I should know that, but I believe that is correct. I believe that it's permanent but non-illuminated most of the year.
As I said, we had circulated around our existing ordinance. I pointed out a few of the things that I think are ripe for change. I know one thing that someone had brought up is the new CVS and the Prickett Preserve project. They do comply with our sign ordinance. However, they've come up with a clever way of advertising within their foyer or lobby. They have their big emblem, not on the wall, not in the window, but set back on a wall interior to the site with big windows so you could see it. And the area in that lobby is illuminated probably a little bit more than it should be. And although technically it complies with our ordinance, one of the things we'd want to look at is there a way to regulate that?
That seems like that's a dicey direction to go because you're still trying to regulate what they're doing inside. They just happen to have a big window.
Right. And I know another thing I've noticed as we started the discussion on signs just driving around town, one of the things we talk about signs are like having stuff in the windows. And I've just noticed that literally almost every business we have has lots of stuff in the windows. Actually, too much, and some of it I find objectionable, but I think it's just a little bit overboard, and we need to take a look at. And even such things as people have the open sign within their window illuminated, and there are a few people even have a flashing, which I know is definitely not permitted.
Yeah, the Princeton ordinance kind of has some clear wordage directly to what you just said in terms of the flashing and the ordinance, or excuse me, the flashing and the illumination. And then I think they also regulate how many signs you can have on a window. So that could be something that we could make concrete, like say, 2 open signs or 2 whatever signs at X feet. So that could be a good guideline to look off.
In addition to the ban, in addition to the 2 things you just mentioned, are there other provisions in the Princeton ordinance that you thought might be useful to look at?
Yeah, I have some highlighted.
Can you give me the section? I can bring it up on the screen.
I think it's T10B 298. general sign requirements. Yeah, under T10B 298 general sign requirements, I liked how they kind of talked about the maintenance, just to kind of codify how they'll need to keep up the maintenance of the signs. Obstruction to doors, windows, or fire escapes or lanes. No signs shall be erected, relocated, or maintained so as to prevent ingress or egress from any door, window, fire escape, etc. Obstruction of architectural features. And then signs not to constitute traffic hazards, which kind of ties into the, not saying that the recessed lighting in CVS would cause something like that, but I think that kind of goes hand in hand with that issue there. And then in the same chapter, subsection H, about the lighting of signs. What else? I also liked how they called out exempt signs not requiring a permit. So maybe that could be a subsection in the side ordinance, just to kind of make it more clear, like if you're looking at it, if you're, like it kind of talks about grave markers, seasonal decorations, which kind of goes without saying, but say you're a homeowner and you want to see if you need a certain type of sign, and if it's under that exempt signs not requiring a permit, that could kind of relieve you of some stress and you wouldn't have to get one. So those are kind of some things I thought were applicable.
And I reviewed it also, and I think some of the provisions of the Princeton ordinance that are maybe attractive to the township, but I find them a little difficult to maybe enforce, is really on the first page that the signs have to be properly located and aesthetically pleasing. So a little subjective on the latter, but the flip side is that's why people called out Princeton Borough as, maybe a model, because they are so I don't know who determines the aesthetically pleasing part. I mean, I know who does. It will be somebody here and somebody on the Board of Supervisors. But I think it's a nice goal, but I think it is difficult. I like also the fact that they, things that Dan had mentioned about the section that gave exempt permits, exempt signs not requiring a permit. I think that was for ease. I think that's nice. And there's one more thing. Oh, they have a maximum of 3 colors on their signs, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, with branding for businesses, I don't know how
That's-
easy that is. Although I'm sure there's something you could write in that you can't just have it.
I've been on the other side of the table, so to speak, representing, so some of the big box stores, I'm not gonna call out anybody, but who have very distinctive colors associated that may exceed 3. Sometimes there are townships, boroughs, cities that just will not allow, i.e. more than 3 colors.
Don't have this.
Yeah, that they're all, they're gold and brown, or they're
Yeah.
whatever the colors are. So there are ways around it. But
There's another one in Princeton that kind of goes in what you were talking about. It says bearer contains statements, words, or pictures were offensive to the community's.
oh, I pulled that one out too. I did know that one.
Yeah.
Yes. I like that. So they have a whole section on it, and they also differ very much from our existing ordinance about non-conforming permanent ordinances, signs, non-conforming permanent signs. I think our ordinance reads that if a non-conforming sign is removed and wants to be replaced, where is it? It's in the, I have it. If at the time of the passage of this ordinance, the sign does not conform in use, it may remain until replacement or rebuilding becomes necessary. And then it has to be replaced within a period not exceeding 2 years. which isn't necessarily unreasonable. The Princeton ordinance is slightly different and it allows for, pardon me, maybe continued and exempt, unless it's specifically abandoned. It has to be, go for a new permit, but it can be replaced.
Yeah, I know like the abandonment of signs and nonconformity. I think that came up with the Village Market. They had a gas station, a little store there for years and years and years. Then I guess the owner, I don't know if they passed away or moved on. And that was over that 2-year threshold that they had to go through the whole process all over again to get approval for the use and the signs and the gas stations. And it was a little bit tortuous, but
That's how ordinance reads.
that's how the ordinance reads. So, I guess is 2 years a good amount of time for a use to be considered abandoned or not? I think probably it is if you've been abandoned for 2 years and you were, well, that's a whole nother discussion. Sorry.
It's just, the point, excuse me, the point was that Princeton's ordinance was a little bit softer in the replacement category.
Normally 2 years, I think, is probably adequate, but I'm just thinking, if somebody abandoned a sign in abandoned, for lack of a better word, in early 2020, and I don't know, 2 years later, they were just getting back on their feet, maybe there was an issue there, but I would think normally 2 years works.
And that's something to consider, that maybe we can extend that. We had the same thing with variances. It used to be, it's only good for 6 months. Well, we kept finding that, sometimes by the time you get the variance, then you have to line up your financing and do the other stuff. They're having trouble getting that within 6 months, and then with litigation and other things. And so we changed that to 2 years for, once the variance is approved, you're good for 2 years. And signs, I mean, if 2 years is adequate, well, that's fine. Or if we think that should be softened, such as Princeton, maybe, well, now's the time to consider it.
I have a question about vehicular signs that we have in the existing ordinance. Does that contemplate when you see like a skin on a car that's an ad? You see that now where people put like a,
Napa Auto Parts.
yeah, you see that all the time, just a skin that goes over the car and it's an advertisement. Maybe the whole car, it may just be a sign on the side.
They had the same question. It's under section 200-83 E8.
E8.
I had that noted also. Is it car wraps or skins?
Yeah, does that, or is that referring to an actual sign?
So I had a note on the same one. My concern was that the language talks about the sign being no longer incidental to the vehicle's primary purpose, right? So shall become a purpose in itself. Does that cover, to your point, it wraps, can I drive a work van? The purpose of that van is like, I'm an electrician, it's an electrician's van. And can I post signage and political statements or other signage and advertising that is not advertising my service, right? Does that ordinance cover that sort of a use where the two uses are separate?
I think where they're getting at that is like, sometimes you have like an old pickup truck or something.
Yeah.
Like for years, there was this truck that said the Patterson Farm. And let's say it was, Fred's Automotive. And they had this antique truck that no longer is used as a vehicle, but they put it out front for advertising. Actually, I know where they have one, Rick Steele's Golf in Newtown. They actually have one of their old trucks there that they no longer use, and it has their logo on it, and they have that parked out front. So I think that's what they're contemplating. And if that's something we would like to take out, I'm sure we can, or if we'd like to put further restrictions on it or clarify the definition to be clear.
Seems to me clarify the definition.
I think we need to, because I think there's a section in here, and I know I read it, but it said that you cannot use objects for signs, i.e. a tire, or it could be a truck or something like that. Like that would be, so I think that would fall more into the category that you were just talking about, Jim, as opposed to this vehicular signs. I don't know. I think maybe it should be clarified.
Yeah, I mean, there's the kind of truck which is long and narrow, that's just like a moving billboard that you don't
Yep.
see too many of anymore, but you used to see those. And then there's sort of a car with a wrap on it that's advertising whatever, anything or everything.
Cleaning services have it, you know.
Yeah.
Well, it says it's no longer incidental to the vehicle's primary purpose. So I would think I think I know what they mean, like the Rick Steele's Golf vehicle they have out front.
That's an easy.
However, it needs to be clarified.
Yeah, the other examples are less clear.
Absolutely. You know, what I always tell people when they say, well, what's your signed ordinance require? I'm like, I have to read it every single time for every single item because it's a little bit outdated, a little confusing, and definitely in need of an update, clarification. Dan and I, when we go through, we sort of look at each other like, what the hell does that mean? I mean, it's,
You see it by all the variances. I mean, we essentially don't have an ordinance really, because we're given so many variances out, because people are like, how can they do this? We're saying, okay, well, I know it doesn't say that, but you can do that.
and that's one of the purposes of the discussion, not to make any decisions tonight, but just to get started, to get your thoughts on certain things. And of course, as you drive around the township and or other townships, if you see signs that you find nice or objectionable that, you know, we may not have that here, but can we make sure we prevent that from being in our town? Like the big M in Middletown.
And just to put a final note on this vehicular signs thing, right? Like, if I own a business, Collins Coffee, and I have a delivery car and I wrap it with Collins Coffee, that's the primary purpose, delivery vehicle. Okay. But if it's just my family car that I wrap in vinyl with Collins Coffee to advertise my business, and I park it on the street in front of my house, or I park it in front of other places, that wrap is incidental to the primary purpose of the vehicle, which is to drive me around town and convey my family. So it would be allowed by this ordinance because it is incidental to the primary use. So I just think that, yeah, that's a thing that we have to address here.
And I did find that section I was that I had seen earlier was section F in that same general section, F8. Prohibited signs and sign elements. Any novelty sign, including but not limited to an object, i.e. or e.g. tire, automobile, food product, etc., is prohibited.
Tony, I had a couple of notes. I had reviewed the document in advance. I just have a couple of notes starting from the beginning if you want me to run through them, or.
Go ahead. Sounds
So
good.
cool. Starting with C4, the posting of signs, no person shall paint, paste, brand, stamp in any manner, place, attach it to a tree, telegraph, electric light, etc. It seems like we're banning the posting of like lost dog signs. And I don't see anything in the ordinance that permits that after that point. I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that we want to be prohibiting by law within the township,
Well, actually, we typically do kind of prohibit those signs. We don't go around tearing them down immediately, but, when you've had a lost dog sign up, after a couple of weeks, we'll
Yeah,
just
sure.
take it down.
Then you have,
I'm-
then you have the tree cutting people who put them up on the telephone pole too high that you have to bring a truck in to get it off.
Yes, some people are pretty ingenious in trying to bypass our code enforcement officer and removal. Like I go and pick up signs quite often too, I'll drive by, and if it's a place that I can safely pull over, all those non-allowed temporary signs are yanked.
Yeah.
But they'll put them in like the busiest location that you can't just jump out of your car. They'll put them in where there's no shoulder because they know that we're less likely to pull them out.
Um, in regards to C6, where we talk about political signs, I think this is just an area where I think the ordinance would benefit from a definition section up front. There are numerous places where political signs are referenced throughout the code, with slightly different wording, and I think it would just be more efficient to define what a political sign is once, and to just, to inherit that definition throughout. Because we have C6 where we talk about political signs. We have 9C. Sorry, what is my 9C? C9? C9 and C10 also talk about political signs. In one case, they're referred to as temporary, and in C9, they're just assumed as maybe they're not. So there's just a lot of references around political signs that we should probably clean up.
And political signs are one of those political footballs, so to
Yeah.
speak. In that, I know there's freedom of speech sort of issues around that, but I think we need to have our solicitor take a look at how do we properly define it, and what can we reasonably regulate. What I've been told by previous solicitors that our current ordinance isn't necessarily enforceable, but I think that's just certain aspects of it. So I think if we could clarify that, it would be a lot better
Yeah.
for everyone.
In F1, we specify, this is what is it? Not the illuminated signs. It's was it bedazzled? What's the language that we use?
And this is like a 1980s ordinance, I think. So I actually have had to look up the word festoon myself.
Festoon lighted, yeah, festooned. Princeton ordinance has this same problem where they refer to incandescent lighting. So they're using they're specifying a lighting technology that we have more lighting technology these days. So I think that in general, we should get rid of incandescent and just reference to illuminated, right? Or artificially illuminated. In F4, my concern there, projecting signs are prohibited in all zoning districts except for the historical commercial district. We probably aren't, but I just had a concern that might then imply that projecting signs are automatically permitted, right? Like, are we overriding the historical commission's authority there just by calling it out in that manner, or do we need to get more specific? This is a question for the solicitor.
Well, all signage in the historic commercial district does need to go through the Historical Architectural Review Board. So there are guidelines for that.
We just say any sign in the HC district must be approved by the historical committee. Don't say what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it says,
Keep the confusion out, because they're deciding anyway.
yeah, so it says sort of like, except for the historic commercial district, which are determined by HARB.
That process is determined by HARB or whoever.
And then we even get into, do we really want to prohibit projecting signs? Or actually, what's the definition of projecting sign? But I think it's a sign, sort of like Edgewood Cafe, that sign that's on the corner of the building that projects out.
When you said projecting signs, I'm thinking of something visual, meaning not physically projecting out, but visually projecting out. So is that defined somewhere, and does that need to be defined?
it is defined
Okay.
earlier in the text. It's a sign that extends more than 8 inches from the surface of the
Yeah.
building.
Hanging sign.
Okay.
15 inches from the wall.
Except
Yeah.
for barber pole. Barber poles are allowed.
Yeah, barber poles are good.
And that's one of those things that, I mean, is there a reason we would want to prohibit projecting signs? I mean, sometimes they can look kind of nice, even in a commercial area, that to prohibit it, I mean, there was some logic on whoever was the origin of this ordinance that was probably passed around from municipality to municipality. But I never saw the reason to prohibit it. I just didn't get it.
The only reason I can say prohibited is there's probably someone thought if you want some sign consistency, I don't think you want theoretically, walk through Edward Village and there's 20 overhead signs projecting from buildings. So if you're not gonna allow that, you just why not just say we don't allow them? Right?
Yeah, there's a logic to it, and it's just a matter of, do we feel that logic is still in place
I'd ask
50 years down the line? Yeah,
you want to risk having a bunch of overhanging signs, getting in the way of each other, or you just want to just keep it the way it is? Say, come up with your signage that doesn't intrude on other.
And listen, I've seen places where like banners are extended from the side of a building and they're tall and not that wide, and it looks tasteful, it looks nice, but those would be prohibited under our code. You can't have them, so.
Yeah, the
Ye-
flip side is there are plenty of strip centers or small villages, et cetera, where they do have those projecting signs. And that's all you see, if it's a walking area, you want to see those projecting signs to know what's
Yeah.
ahead. Even some of the newer strip, like the discount centers almost, and many of those have, nice signs that are projecting. And, because it's a walkable area.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have an opinion one way or another. I'm just.
neither do I.
Yeah.
But it's a good
Yeah.
topic
To
for
me, it
discussion.
needs to be
Conversation.
clear.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of administering it, if you're gonna administer, it, like, we're trying to the main reason we're here, right? We're trying to clean up a process because it's got a million variances for everyone that comes through and it's not really doing what the intent is. So don't create something that's gonna just do the same thing, potentially.
Yep.
If you're gonna do it, make sure it's clear and my read of this is they made it okay in one particular district because there's another sort of aesthetic review board that's gonna say yes or no based on some standards that are appropriate for that.
I almost think, like, and I could be wrong, but the way that could solve your problem, or the concern you're bringing up is in F4, just get rid of the HC district wordage because there's a whole section. It is, well, towards the end, it's on the last page, for E, about signs in the historical commercial district, which says everything that you have to do to get a sign. So I almost feel like to your point, if you just got rid of HC district and just said projected signs are prohibited, then the subsection for E, for signs in the historic commercial district, talk about all the requirements that are required to get a sign. If
I
that
think
makes
you
sense.
have to reference that in number 4.
Yeah. I
Mm.
mean, you just reference the fact that, okay, the historical HC district has a different set of standards
Yeah,
than every other district, and it's a conscious decision by the township.
right.
And there's a whole process with a group of purported experts that are gonna help guide whoever wants to do it through to the right answer.
I would also potentially suggest we strike F4 and we simply say that the use of projecting signs must be consistent with the other businesses or residences within the whatever the area of development. So basically, no one's allowed to have them except historic because they're the only ones allowed to have them today. But if a new shopping center were to be built, or if the giant shopping center or McCaffrey's were to be redeveloped and rebuilt, they could apply for projecting signs right at that time as part of their zoning process to say, well, we have a vision for a different kind of signage.
Good point. That's all I have for right now. If anyone has any other comments.
I have a couple more. I promise, not too many.
Okay, good.
Ju-
You
Just a couple
hesitated a second. I thought you were done.
I've got a note on, hang on a second, 11B, and I think I probably wrote this backwards again. This is Section 84 residential districts. 11B, yeah, related to the text. So this is 200-84A 11B. Permanent development entrance signs, signs of the entrance to residential development permitted subject to the following regulations. Text. It says the text should be limited to the name of the development and lettered in a style compatible with the residential nature of the community. By limiting it solely to the name of the development itself, we are limiting some potentially important information for folks driving by or prospective homeowners in that area. You know, some places in other states where they have HOAs, it'll tell you it's a, you know, an HOA community, it's a managed community, it's an apartment community. You know, currently our ordinance does not permit signage which describes the nature of the community itself. And that's probably something that we should revise if we're going to revise things.
I like that idea. I think that may have been one of the variances that have been granted in the past with something similar.
I've got another one on political stuff, 200-84.B.2. It again references political signs, but appears to use different language to define a political sign. So we're just redefining it over and over and over again. It's just a request to clean it up. I have selective enforcement concerns around the historical district signage, which is E6 under 200-85. I'm not trying to get us to send code enforcement after businesses, but I do know there's a number of businesses in the historical district which are in no way compliant with the regulation that says no signs in windows. There's actually a lot of non-compliant signage there. Again, I'm not trying to tell anyone to go down there, but if we should enforce them. If we don't, then we should adjust them.
Right, and that was one of the things I had brought up earlier. But actually, although the Giant Shopping Center and the McCaffrey Shopping Center are subject to Historical Architectural Review Board, neither one of them is located in the Historical Commercial District. They are subject to those regulations only because of the approval and the development agreement and the litigation. That said, that it must go.
They are not the businesses I'm referring to. Yeah, if you were to drive down Yardley Langhorne Road, you would notice what I believe are historical business district businesses, which are not compliant here, right? It's just
actually, I know a couple of ones. I know what you're talking about now because I just mentioned that to Dan today. Some people are putting banners like over their windows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or on the porch, and they're wonderful businesses. I go there myself. You know, I think that we should be a business positive community, and if that kind of signage is important to that business, we should have that as a discussion, and around potential adjustments. But you know, I don't think the ordinance is being followed or is necessarily being well served right now.
It's not being followed, and I think a few of them went up during COVID. Then another one just went up recently that we need to get a handle on that and have them come into compliance.
Just before we move on, Jim, when you were talking about the McCaffrey Shopping Center and Giant Shopping Center, it's not in the historic district, but this does apply to them. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, they are required to have any building changes or signs on the building go through the Historic Architectural Review Board for a certificate of appropriateness. You'll find that almost everything we have in our town doesn't comply with our ordinance. We've either given a variance.
Not supposed to say that out loud.
Well, by right, sorry, by right hasn't been, isn't compliant, but we have granted variances to allow what we have in our town, or we've gone to court and come up with settlements that allow everything, which gets to the point that nothing we have really is by right. It's always by litigation when it should be, if we're going to allow it by variances and by litigation, then maybe we should change our ordinance to allow what we would otherwise permit. That makes sense.
It does make sense. And just this particular subsection 6, is for a supermarket, an impossibility. I mean, they're always putting signs in the windows, right? I mean, that's, so if you're going to allow a supermarket, which we have, and you have to let them put signs in the window. I mean, it's just sort of, I mean, I think, maybe everybody else disagrees, but,
Yeah, and a few of them
Oh,
maybe
it's
have
an
overdone
impossibility
it.
for almost any business.
I'm sorry, Colin, what was that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my internet is unreliable at the moment. I was saying it's difficult on any business
Yeah.
to not be able to put up a sign that says, this is what's new this week. This is what's interesting. We accept these credit cards. Here are our hours. Like, those things are not permitted under this ordinance.
And that's one of the issues.
I must feel like, when we look at these things, we're, like, we have these 10-page documents and all these, like, ID, like all these details and definitions, cross references. And I think we get twisted up in the weeds because of that. And I think if we want to change, we know what the problem statement is, right? We have an unenforceable, essentially an unapplicable sign code. And we just want to create a new sign code. Start with a blank piece of paper and then start building it down with the details. Because right now we're getting stuck in all the details. I'm not even sure what we want.
Yeah, Colin's just pointing out flaws that he's observed, just
We had to start with.
clearly looking at it.
If we want to come up with a new ordinance, start with what we want, design with what we want, then how we address all of what's out there will come out of that. Or we're already like talking about, should it be this? And we're talking about the exceptions, and we're talking about this. We're getting back right to where we started, because if one of two things doesn't come out of this, either we have a much simpler code that just does essentially the same thing, we give everyone essentially what they want to do, or we have a much clearer code that we are going to enforce much more rigidly to developers in town, right? And business owners in town. Because if we don't have one of those two things, why are we bothering going through this exercise?
Well, and that's why we're just starting to get general ideas and show, like, you see what we have, you see what someone else has that people think, oh, Princeton has nice signage.
Yeah.
And then to see,
Yeah.
well, even Princeton, it sounds great, but Maureen just looked at it real quickly and pointed out several flaws, and so did a few other people here that, like you said, we have to kind of boil it all down to what do we really want to see? And that's why I suggested, as you're going around throughout the town and other towns, to look at what you think is okay and not okay.
Is it just by default, or you may, yeah, I think I'm on, you may not know the answer to the question, but how did we default grocery stores in a non-historic district to the historic board?
It was the 1980s, and at that time, we were opposing everything that came into the town. So basically, anyone who wanted to do anything in town had to go to court to fight, and we would usually lose, and but we'd extract some minor concession.
Just happened to be the board that was available to.
And they said, sure, we'll go through hard, but we're winning in court. And it's kind of a silly way to do it when you could just write your regulations for what you want, and then, or just ask them what you want instead of going to court to sue.
This question is, when you get to that point, why didn't it get thrown to the zoning board as opposed to the historic board? That's my, which has nothing to do with the grocery store and the non-historic.
They wanted the look and feel of those two shopping centers to kind of look somewhat historic. And
Yield the
and they don't look
historic
bad, they're just
Indian
outdated
restaurant.
now.
But I think
I think I know the answer to that. It's really, we have a zoning hearing board, and we have through history of my 20 years in this town, there are a group of people who are very interested and experts in the historical part of our town. And so sometimes when things come up, they have a voice that forces it to go through that expertise town, and not everything is required or we have. That's I don't think anyone's going to
Yeah.
argue with that statement.
Right. Yeah. So I think, anything else, Colin? I'm sorry.
One last thing, and I'm sure this won't take very long. I do appreciate in the Princeton one, T10B-293B, their expanded definition of potential confusion with traffic signs and signals. They say you can't use words like stop or warning or danger or whatever. Ours just says that you can't, I think, mimic traffic signals. So I think that that's a really good piece of the ordinance to take a lesson from for us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry that took so long.
And we'll kind of go through, circle back a little bit. And I think Dan and I can come up with some ideas of how to streamline some of the stuff and then give you some decision options on different things that I know he and I won't agree on and you guys won't agree on, but at least it'll start the discussion of, well, you could have this or this or this, or maybe you guys can come up with something even better than what we or others have thought of.
Thank you. All right, so there's nothing to vote on, and we just move on to the next item then. Next item on our agenda is accessory.
There's public comment.
There is. Oh,
With
I'm
the red
sorry
light.
about that. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Hey, can you hear me?
Same as last time.
Yep.
Okay. So I understand we have somebody who wants to make a public comment about this issue.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, hi. My name is Alex Davidoff. I was at the last meeting. It's not in pertaining to this issue. I just wanted to ask the Planning Commission a couple of quick questions, if that's okay.
Okay. I'm sorry. Could you say your name again?
Alex Davidoff, I'm
Oh.
resident of Bridal Estates Drive.
Okay. And Alex, at the last meeting, you were asking us about the Wright Farm, and does this have to do with the Wright Farm
Yes,
all
sir.
over again?
Yeah, I just want to know if you'd been able to review the plans or if there was any update on when the specific Planning Commission meeting was going to be held. Just a quick question.
Okay, so it has not yet been presented to the Planning Commission. We haven't reviewed the materials yet. Jim or Dan, you may have a better idea of when we may get this in front of us.
I've been told by the applicant that they're looking at the review letters that have been issued by our consultants and by some of our other recommending bodies, and they're looking into possibly revising the plans and coming back. I know one of the things they wanted to do was have a scoping meeting with PennDOT to review what they're proposing as part of their entrance onto Route 332. And as of right now, there's no meeting set up with PennDOT yet. But I'll find out from the developer what the status of that is and give you an update. It possibly might be on next month's Planning Commission if they want to present it to the Planning Commission and go through and get your input before they make changes, or they may want to clear up a bunch of little issues before they go there. So I will let Mr. Davidoff know, as well as other interested parties, as well as our Planning Commission sometime in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Thank you. It's also my understanding that if the meeting is not held on June 10th to discuss this, that the applicant will have to request an extension. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's all I wanted to ask. Have a great night, everybody.
You too. Thank you. All right. Next item on our agenda is the accessory structure ordinance discussion. And I guess it's either Jim or Dan, right? Okay.
All right, this one's a little bit more cut and dry. It's not as complicated. It's just one subsection, but it's something that comes up a lot at the building permit stage. Just have received some kind of pushback from residents, and I think it could be updated. So the current ordinance for residential accessory buildings says that a residential accessory building incidental to the uses permitted in the zoning districts shall be located only in the fourth of the lot farthest removed from the abutting streets. In no case shall they be located less than 10 feet from any side or rear lot lines. The heights of the accessory buildings shall not exceed 15 feet. Jim or I have no problem with the 15 feet. I think that makes sense. But our recommendation would be to decrease the setback to around 3 feet and to get rid of the wordage about the fourth of the lot and just make it kind of the rear of the home.
Why?
What do you mean?
Why do we want to reduce that setback?
I mean, okay, so if you're getting a shed for your house,
Yeah.
10 feet's a very large amount to put it from your property line. And a lot of residents have conveyed that. I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to put it 10 feet from my house. And also, a lot of people have very long lots, like some of the houses on Edgewood. It's kind of a hardship if you have a 2-acre lot that's very deep and you have to put your shed all the way in the back. But again, I mean, this is your recommendation. I don't know if Jim has further.
Yeah, this is something that is very common at the zoning hearing board. They request a variance, in a larger lot, 10 foot off of your rear and side property line isn't really a big deal. When you have a more narrow lot, 10 feet off the side and the front puts it almost in the middle of your backyard. And so they routinely grant variances to allow for those accessory structures or sheds to be closer to the side and rear property line.
Jim, I'm not following you. You're saying that if you have a larger lot, it puts it in the middle of the backyard?
All the way in the back. So
Okay.
if you have a house on Edgewood that's very deep, all the way in the back, you'd have to walk to get something from
Yeah,
your
that's the
shed.
fourth of the lot part, which, so actually, if you had a house with some of the older homes, they have just the driveway, they never put a garage in.
Right.
And now, years later, someone wants to put a garage in, they either have to attach it to the house or they have to move it all the way in the back of their yard and add an extra 30, 40, 50 feet of driveway to get to it, to be in that fourth of the lot furthest removed from the road. I actually looked at the genesis of that, and originally that was only for corner lots, where they said, if you have a corner lot, we want it to be sort of in the backyard by virtue of being back here from each road. And then later they dropped the corner lot part and they just said any lot, it has to be way in the back. Looking around as I drive through the township, I see literally hundreds of non-conforming sheds all throughout our township, where they put it at the end of their driveway, they put it right in their backyard, they put it up, I don't know about under their deck, but I haven't seen that one, but I wouldn't doubt it. Or they put it right up in the corner of their property so that they can maximize the space in their yard. And it's one of these things that I know zoning hearing board members have said, why do we keep hearing this over and over again? If we think a lesser setback than 10 feet is appropriate, why don't we just rewrite the regulation rather than just, doing it by
And
litigation?
then just to show what some nearby townships do, I made a little spreadsheet. Falls is no less than 4 feet. Bristol's is 5 feet. Middletown's is 3 feet. Marsville's is 6 feet for some buildings and 3 feet for others. For the 3 feet for the sheds and 6 feet for the larger buildings. And then Northampton is 7 feet. So I think, for similar townships, they're kind of, I feel like theirs is much more realistic, to be honest.
I personally think 3 feet's too small. If you have any work to do on the shed, you're essentially need to work in someone else's property. Gotta be, I mean, I'm making a number up. I'm sure the technical people know better than I do. It's gotta be at least 5 feet.
Okay, so yeah, so then 5 could be a recommendation if you think.
Yeah, we ran through that, I think, 2 months ago, didn't we, Adrian?
Say that
Someone
again?
tried, Didn't we run through that 2 months ago? Someone's trying to put a pool house like 18 inches from a lot line or something?
Yeah, something. I think so.
Yeah. I think 5 or 6 feet's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I don't know. We get a lot of building permits and even just someone asking, the requirements for a shed, it could be something in Yardley Hunt and they'll say, I want to put a shed in the rear. And then I'll tell them it has to be 10 feet off the property line and they just look very confused. So I think we're not just, I just think, I don't know what the rationale for that was back then. But I think compared to other townships of similar size, I think it's not necessarily the right setback, but obviously the recommendation would come from you, not me.
So the question is, when you're seeing these requests for variances, is it mostly sheds or do you also see it for garages where people look? at it?
Mostly sheds is the pushback.
I do like the one town that has different numbers for different size accessory buildings. A shed being 3 feet off the property line, it's not a big deal, and you can get around, mow it. You can do your basic maintenance in a 3-foot area. But then when you get into a larger structure like a garage or a larger accessory building, I think I like the idea of having a 3-foot for a shed, and then when you get over a certain size building,
Yeah.
then make it the 10 feet.
The Morrisville one calls that out exactly. So it says completely detached accessory buildings may occupy a required side or rear yard, but shall be located no closer than 6 feet from any side or rear property line. And then they talk about the sheds, which I don't necessarily think we should regulate the width and the height, but they talk about 3 feet because they're smaller structures. So I kind of personally like this ordinance.
Basic.
Right.
Smaller in size, setback is not as significant as 10 feet.
Yeah.
The second issue being that last quarter of the lot.
Yeah, because essentially, so say if you're looking at like a lot that's a perfect square, but you cut it in fours. I mean, a homeowner's kind of look at you like, why the back fourth? Like,
Like that, if you're just trying, you don't want, like, we design these neighborhoods, right, and we're a residential neighborhood, like, all of a sudden you have these accessory structures.
right?
You want them right on, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So you want them somehow buffered from the road, like, I'd be fine if that said like back half of the property, back,
Yeah, and that was just kind of my rationale for the rear because that's a little bit more,
Problem is, if somebody has a deep lot, the problem, that's the only thing.
Yeah.
By percentage of the.
No, for sure, for sure. I mean, that's in my opinion. I mean, I know this isn't a zoning hearing board, but that's quite a big hardship if you're having to get a variance for something you have no control over, really.
It's another reason to separate out sheds from garages and things like that. If somebody has a deep lot and you don't want to have them have the garage all the way in the back.
Well, maybe we could look at, is it based on size? Is it based on volume?
So I-
Like that too. Like barns, greenhouses.
Correct.
For use.
In my mind, the garage has a foundation. The shed doesn't. Shed is just a structure on a pad,
Right.
whether it's gravel pad or whether it's a concrete pad or whatever, but it's not a fixed foundation structure. A garage would have a foundation, correct?
Well, they have a footing, not a foundation. Yeah.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
I may not be using the proper term.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a specific difference between somebody goes and buys a shed from, out in Lancaster County and has it delivered to their side yard, they put a gravel pad down versus, okay, I'm gonna put a car garage, and all that stuff, right?
Right. And I think a lot of the garages, the zoning hearing board still wants to have a garage 10 feet off the property line, but they'll grant them the relief from the fourth of the lot because it makes sense if you have a house that never had a garage to put it at the end of the driveway where it would logically be.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I like the one where it had the dual standard of small for small, larger for larger.
Well, the garage, we can work with that by saying that if you're adding a garage to a dwelling that doesn't have a garage, as long as it abuts the driveway, you're good to go, right? Regardless of which quarter or quadrant it happens to be in, attached or otherwise. My biggest concern is Dan, you said you're not worried about the 15-foot height, but I have 3 daughters and I want to build a Rapunzel tower, and I can't build a Rapunzel tower if I'm limited to 15 feet.
Well, we don't really regulate play structures.
Yeah, that's a play structure. I'd help you build that myself. That sounds lovely. Yeah.
We've
But-
actually had people say, why aren't we enforcing our standards on swing sets?
Yeah.
Like, well, we don't regulate swing sets.
Yeah, it's kind of a de minimis addition to your lot.
And I have seen some ordinances which state that they can't be, regardless if they're garages or sheds or whatever, they can't be any more forward than the end of the back end of the house.
Huh.
So that could be the delineation, that could be the line of delineation. And then some even go so far as that they can't be seen from with the
Yeah.
exception of driveways, but maybe with sheds, they can't be seen from the street.
I like your first solution.
Yeah, I've seen that. I know one township in particular does that.
The Northampton
so that you
example
don't have
has that.
possibility of them coming into the front yard or even close to the front yard.
Colin, you said something and I don't know that we heard you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying, I was agreeing with the solicitor. The Northampton example includes that notation that it has to be behind the back building line, which I think is a lot more graceful than defining the back half or the back quarter. And then to the point of like the shed can't be visible from the street. I didn't realize this, but I have a non-compliant shed. It's
Not most, a lot of people do.
well, but yeah, so my garage sticks out from the side of my house and there's space behind it between the garage and the back line of the home. And that's where my shed is. And you can't see my shed from the street. It's kind of tucked into a little kind of corner behind the garage. I guess I need to be a good monkey and move it, but it seems to be an acceptable placement for me that if someone had a similar design and wanted to tuck a shed in there, it shouldn't be a big issue. We should permit that.
Well, if you'd like, Dan could look into sort of crystallizing what everyone came up with into words that you could then look at further at our next meeting and then see if that kind of captures what we were talking about.
What about if it's connected? I'm sorry, I may have missed it, but what about if it's actually connected to that?
Like with a breezeway?
Well, I see some of these, like in my neighborhood, I see some of these, these Lancaster style, they actually come in and they match your siding of your house and,
If you're attached to the house, it's considered to be part of the house.
even though it's not an interior.
Correct.
Those things can be made to look exactly like the house, match the roof, they match the siding and.
Yeah, we've had some people who wanted a detached garage and they can't meet the fourth of the lot standard, but it's close enough that our ordinance says if you attach it by a breezeway, then it's considered part of the principal structure. And provided you can meet the setback requirement, which is greater for the principal building than the accessory building, then you're okay. But if not, then it gets to be kind of, you're playing games when we could kind of get to where a lot of people are, where they want to go to, and lessen the burden on the zoning hearing board to hear the repetitive variances.
I personally wouldn't be comfortable going to 3 feet unless you go survey a lot of neighbors who have neighbors with sheds less than 10 feet from their property.
Mhm.
Neighbors who might not want.
I tend to agree that 3 feet's tight.
That's tight.
That's tight.
What's,
I don't know what 10's an arbitrary number. It's
Yeah,
nice round
maybe
number.
5 works better.
I think 5 would be fine, but we would need like a tangible number.
To go construct that, they want to paint it like.
Adrian, could you turn on your mic, please?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
No, I said, I think 3 feet's too tight. And
And I think they should get neighbor feedback if they're thinking about going that tight. The neighbors that don't have the shed. And I personally think that you have to figure out what the space is for painting, or installing electrical, or doing landscaping around it, where that work can 100% be done on the owner's property, and they don't have to encroach onto the neighbor's property.
What's the setback for a fence?
It can't be, we say it's like 6 inches. It can't be, it has to be fully on your property.
That's
So
it?
you could go right up to the edge.
Oh, really?
Most fence companies make it 6 inches off to a foot off, only because they don't want to have to move the fence if they're off a little bit in their measurement.
Permit, God, this was probably 18 years ago here, and I had to get, the township made me get a letter from my neighbor, because it was like a foot and a half on either side of the property line. They wanted at least a mowable space if both neighbors had a fence, maintainable space between the fences.
For the weeds.
And I had to get a note from my neighbor that I could cross over, and if you go into my backyard, you'll see a 3 or 4 foot piece of fence where my fence goes up and it ties into his existing fence. And it kind of made sense, as much of a pain in the neck it was, because if I put it right up to the property line, he had a pool fence there, there's a 1.5 foot space where nobody can get in there and maintain it.
But that's only because he had a fence first, right?
He had the fence.
The first
And
fence
you were
can
just
go,
tying into it.
So no,
Yeah.
but I could tie, it's on his fence is on his property, and I came up the side of my property, and about the halfway, like his fence section was about as equal as mine. I just told him, okay, if I can cut over and tie into your fence, so we have a solid fence, and we have this weird 2 fence situation. He goes, you have an extra 1.5 foot that you have on your yard, and I have an extra 1.5 foot on the backside that's on my yard.
And that's sort of what Dan was saying, that it has to be on your property unless you get written permission from the next door neighbor. Yeah.
That should be in my file. There's a written note.
I'm gonna go check on that and verify.
Yeah, I bet I know who the person was that did that.
I started thinking about it, made sense to me, because if you allow two neighbors to put fences like a foot apart from each other, you can't maintain it. There's weeds, grass, trees.
True. I think the closer the better, because it's almost like an inadvertent easement with actually having an easement there. Like it's just a strip of land, and that creates that problem. So the closer the better, personally, I think. And if you get a fence permit, you need a survey or a site plan, and we'll give that to residents as a courtesy if we have one on file, so it's free. And you have to highlight it. Getting them to highlight it's another story, but yeah.
Anyway, those are my thoughts.
So we have 2 people for more than 3 feet. About John and Colin, do you have any thoughts on that?
John can't make it, but Colin's here.
Okay with 3 feet.
Oh, it's John DiLorenzo, sorry.
Just because I think a lot of people like to put these like little sheds that they buy on their driveways, and a lot of times the driveways are pretty much close to the property line. So I think 3 feet would solve some problems.
Okay. Do you have a foot in mind? Do you have like a number in mind?
Okay,
Right.
3 feet?
How
Okay.
about you, Colin?
Okay.
yeah, listen, I'm inclined to think that 5 is generally, for larger properties makes sense, but for a smaller property, every foot inside your property line is a premium, right? And I can see a 3 foot setback providing enough space to maintain the structure and the property at that point. While allowing you to enjoy as much of your yard as possible. I mean, if 2 neighbors decide to put sheds one behind the other, you've got 6 foot in between. That's actually a pretty decent amount of clearance. So, I want to be respectful that not every property is as large as mine, right? So I'd be in favor of a 3 foot.
Okay. So
Or
we'll come up with something
dependent,
and then.
yeah, or
circulate
dependent
around.
dependent on our residential zones, right? 3 foot in some zones where the minimal lot
I
size.
mean,
That's an even better idea.
The other thing, does it make sense to look at, when you talk about behind the back part of the house, what if it was parallel? So in other words, if somebody wanted to put a garage, so the back of the garage is parallel with the back of the house. Would that be a problem? I mean, right now, we're talking about it being
I think it'd be
behind,
a site issue, right, for the neighbors, right?
I mean, you're still within the setbacks, so.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Then you
setback
could
would be
just
fine.
attach it to your house then, maybe.
Maybe you don't, maybe it's, you know,
Well, I'll take a look at that.
I'm talking about, so.
Yeah.
So you're not going behind the house for that.
Just
one.
for fun, right. Got it. Thank you. This was very productive.
Excellent. So we'll hear this again at some other point in the future. Okay,
I'll be shorter than the signs.
I think so. Someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion we adjourn.
Your
I'll
second.
second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Can I put a sign on my